Madam President, it's no secret that Majority Leader Harry Reid and I disagree on a great many topics. And yet I rise today in praise of Senator Reid. In particular, I wish to praise Senator Reid for agreeing to pass the bill that the House of the House of Representatives passed 12:30 in the morning yesterday that would fund our military. For weeks, President Obama and Senate Democrats have been threatening to hold in jeopardy the paychecks of the men and women of our military if there's a government shutdown. And I commend the Majority Leader for agreeing to pass it, for not objecting, for not standing in the way. And for everyone who thinks that compromise is impossible in Washington, that working together is impossible in Washington, I would point to this as an example. That bill passed the House of Representatives unanimously. It came over to the Senate, and just a few minutes ago we all saw it pass the Senate unanimously. It should be able to be on President Obama's desk for signature by tonight. And Madam President, that's exactly as it should be. The soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines who risk their lives defending our nation should not have their paychecks held hostage to any potential government shutdown in Washington. So I salute the Majority Leader for doing the right thing. I salute the Senate Democrats for not blocking the paychecks of the men and women in the military, of taking them off the table and saying, regardless of what happens, we're going to pay our troops. That was the right thing to do. Now, I would also note, for those who would like to see a resolution of this impasse, I, for one, don't want to see a government shutdown. And I think it is unfortunate that the Majority Leader seems bound and determined to force a government shutdown. In the course of the past several weeks, we have seen the House of Representatives repeatedly attempt to compromise. My view, and the view of a great many Republicans, is that Obamacare is a disaster, a train wreck, a nightmare. Those last two terms, the term train wreck comes from the Democratic senator who was the lead author of Obamacare. Nightmare is the term that was used by Teamsters President James Hoffa. My view is we should repeal it in its entirety. But I would note that was not my starting position on this debate. It was not the starting position of the House of Representatives. Instead, they started with the position that it should be defunded, which itself represented a compromise. The House of Representatives passed a bill to fund the entirety of the federal government, every bit of it, except for Obamacare, and to defund Obamacare. They sent it over to the Senate, and what did the Majority Leader, what did the Senate Democrats do? On a straight party line vote, every Senate Democrat voted no, absolutely not. We reject it in its entirety. They voted, in effect, to force us into a shutdown. Now, the House of Representatives was not done with that. They came back at 12:30 in the morning, late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and passed yet another continuing resolution that represented a second compromise, where yet again the House said, we want to fund the government. We don't want to shut down. We want to keep the government going. Instead of defunding, which is what the House preferred, the House instead said, let's delay Obamacare. Let's delay it. President Obama has already delayed it for giant corporations. He's already exempted members of Congress. Both of those actions were contrary to law. The House of Representatives said, let's delay it for ordinary families the same way it's been delayed for big companies. It shouldn't be the case that giant corporations get treated better by the federal government than hardworking American families. Now, Madam President, that was a compromise, and it was a compromise even though the Senate under Majority Leader Reid had not compromised at all, had held an absolutist position. 12:30 in the morning, early Sunday morning, the House voted on that. Did the Senate come back yesterday? No, Madam President, we did not. The Majority Leader could have called the Senate back. We should have called the Senate back. We were just 48 hours away from a government shutdown, but apparently the Majority Leader made the decision that it was more important for senators to be home on vacation, home playing golf, home doing anything but being here on the floor of the Senate doing the people's business. So instead, many senators came back today. And we voted just a couple of hours ago, and once again, Majority Leader Reid and every single Senate Democrat voted to shut down the government. Responded to the House's second compromise, not with any discussion, any compromise, any middle ground, but said simply no. The position of the Senate Democrats is absolutely not. Are we going to listen to the millions of young people coming out of schools who are not able to find jobs because of Obamacare? The majority leader says no. Are we going to listen to the millions of single moms who are struggling to feed their kids and finding themselves forcibly put into 29 hours a week of work because of Obamacare? The majority leader says no. Are we going to listen to millions of recent immigrants who are struggling to provide for their families and facing skyrocketing health insurance premiums? The majority leader says no. Are we going to listen to millions of retirees and people with disabilities and spouses who are covered on their spouses' health insurance plans, all of whom are losing or at risk of losing their health insurance? The majority leader says no. Instead, the majority leader shared to this body that I was, and I wrote this down, the, quote, chief Senate rabble-rouser. Now, Madam President, I'm not entirely sure what that is. I wasn't aware that was an official designation. I would note previously the majority leader from the floor of the Senate had described me as a, quote, schoolyard bully. And look, it is entirely the majority leader's prerogative if he views the way to carry out his jobs as engaging in personal insult and ad hominem attack. I, for one, do not intend to reciprocate. I will note that what he seems most dismayed about is in the past 2 weeks, the voices of the American people have begun to be heard in this body. In the past 2 weeks, the voices of millions of Americans losing their health insurance, losing their jobs, being forced into part-time work, millions of Americans who are struggling have begun to be heard. We have begun to make D.C. listen. And that apparently, the voices from our constituents, from the men and women of America, apparently to the majority leader constitutes, quote, rabble-rousing. I have a different view of what our responsibility is. I would also note that the majority leader just told us moments ago, quote, we've had enough, we're not going to negotiate. Madam President, I find that quite remarkable because to date, it has been the House of Representatives that has been negotiating, that has been compromising, that has been trying to find a way to resolve this so that we can keep the government running and at the same time answer the millions of Americans who have been hurting. And the answer from the majority leader over and over again has been no, 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 we will not compromise, we will not talk. And as the majority leader said, he hadn't compromised yet, and he doesn't intend even to negotiate. Madam President, that's unfortunate.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I would be happy to yield to my friend from Texas for a question.
The senator has described accurately the back and forth between the absolutist position that the majority leader has taken that says nothing can change Obamacare because apparently he thinks it's absolutely perfect and we shouldn't change a letter, even though, as you pointed out, a number of Obamacare's biggest advocates are now coming back and saying it's a nightmare. I think you quoted Jimmy Hoffa for one of those. But is the senator aware that reportedly the House is going to be voting later on today and be changing once again the continuing resolution and sending it back over here? This time, the report is that they will vote to delay the individual mandate to make it match, as the senator pointed out, the employer mandate's already been unilaterally delayed by the president in an act of lawlessness. Unfortunately, it's not an isolated event. And then the Vitter language, which will overturn the Office of Personnel Management interpretation, which basically carves out Congress and congressional staff from the law that will apply to everyone else. It strikes me that that is another attempt by the House to enter into some negotiation. Would the senator care to venture a guess as to what sort of fate that good faith attempt by the House to keep negotiations open, what that will lead to, and whether or not I'd be interested in the senator's observation about whether he believes, as I do, that Senator Reid is marching toward a government shutdown, and nothing the House does, nothing the House passes will deter him from shutting down the federal government at midnight tonight.
I thank my friend, the senior senator from Texas. I think he is exactly right. indeed the conduct of the majority leader. It's been recently reported in the press that the majority leader advised President Obama, do not even engage in conversations or negotiations with congressional leaders. And as the senior senator from Texas observed, the House is repeatedly trying to solve this problem, to keep the government funding, and to do it in a way that responds to the millions of American people who are hurting under Obamacare. And the answer from the majority leader over and over and over again has simply been, no, we will not talk, we will not negotiate, we will not compromise, we will not listen to the American people. I'm reminded of the old philosophical question, if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear, does it make a noise? Likewise, if the House endeavors to compromise responsibly and the majority leader and the president refuse to participate at all, can you solve the problem? Ultimately, the only way to solve the problem is for Washington to listen to the people. If Majority Leader Reid insists on forcing a government shutdown, then we may face a government shutdown. I think that is an irresponsible course of action. If the House of Representatives asks tonight, I believe this Senate should come back immediately and pass the continuing resolution, whatever the House passes. I don't know what it will be, but it will be yet another good faith effort to keep the government running and to address the train wreck of a law that is Obamacare. And I very much hope that this body begins to listen to the people. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.